This morning, we are continuing in our study of James, the first chapter. And I know it's difficult to get everything in one lesson on this entire section. But it's all in one. And what he's talking about is the blessing to be a child of God and being strengthened by the trials that we face. He begins that back in verse 2 where he says, "Consider it all joy, my brethren, when you encounter various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. And let endurance have its perfect result, so that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. But if any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all generously and without reproach, and it will be given to him." And we talked about this last Lord's Day, was if we need assistance to endure the trials that we face, we ask of God. And he's going to give it to us. It's not going to be with reproach. He's going to give us the assistance we need. And then we noted here in verse 6 through 8, but he must ask in faith without doubting, without any doubting. For the one who doubts is like the surf of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. For the man ought not to expect that he will receive anything from the Lord, being a double-minded man, unstable in his ways. We can't say, "God, help me," and then not expect God to help. But God is going to take care of us as we face these various trials, and will strengthen us if we believe. And that's what it boils down to here in verse 8. Being a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. We can't be unstable. We have to have faith in God that God is going to take care of us when we face whatever difficulties come our way. Now we got down to verse 9 for this morning. It says, "But the brother of humble circumstance is to glory in his high position." Verse 10. "And the rich man is to glory in his humiliation, because like flowering grass he will pass away." So we have an example, and then the explanation of the example here within this context. He notes, to begin with, here in verse 9, a contrast between the brother of low degree and the brother that has much. In essence, the rich man. The word here denoting the brother of humble circumstance brings to light the idea of a lowly condition to a low degree, for whatever reason it may be. Now, it's been noted that it may be because he is poor, undergoing trials that are so heavy that they are very difficult to endure. But he has to allow these things to have their perfect work, building that endurance. The point is that he is going through difficulty at this time and is encouraged to glory in his estate. And I told y'all a couple of weeks ago that here in, up here in verses 2 and 3, these are the verses that I kept on my heart whenever I was hurt, whenever I got hurt. And I was pretty low degree. Well, at that time I was, before I was a little bit high degree, but it was tough. But I was enduring it, and I knew if I kept faithful, and that's what he's kind of bringing to light. Even if we are in a difficult position, it's because we know that God is with us. That we're not only going to endure, but we're going to get stronger because of whatever we are dealing with. And he says, but the brother of humble circumstance is to glory. Glory denotes the idea of being, yes, boastful, to be thankful, to be or to understand the blessedness of God helping us grow and strengthen. And I can even imagine across our world some of the things that people go through, some of the struggles that people endure. And can you even fathom in your mind, under the Neroian persecution, the Christians of that era, there in the first century, what they had to endure just to be a child of God? And that's been a reality across our world since day one. Persecution as Christians. Even if we are being persecuted as Christians, we can utilize that trial to strengthen us and to strengthen our faith. And instead of allowing it to get us down, to glory in it, to bring us up to that high position, that measure, that knowing that, well, here's the reality. It doesn't matter what will happen to me. I'm a child of God. And God's taking care of me. Jesus promised those King James many mansions. We got a place. It's a whole lot better than here. And we can be strengthened. And we can be encouraged. This glory, and I want to kind of note that it is on account of the blessings that God gives us. The thought appears to be that the man who is currently struggling low with trials, yet manifest that perfect mind, that faith, he's gaining endurance. He's moving higher. He's lifting himself up. I understand that people sometimes struggle with self-esteem, and that's understandable. And it's hard for people to overcome low self-esteem. But it's even harder to do it by yourself. And it's much easier to do it with God. A lot of folks come to the point that it's what somebody else thinks or what somebody else's perception of them is what makes their life. But what strengthens us is what God thinks. Are we obedient to Him? Are we following Him? The key factor is that our hope is in Christ Jesus, and the eternal glorification that shall belong to the faithful. Peter puts it like this in 1 Peter chapter 5. 1 Peter chapter 5. And let's begin down in verse 4. 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 4. Peter says, and when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the unfading crown of glory. That's what we're lifted up to. It's the same thing that we note over in Revelation 2, verse 10. Looking for that crown of glory. He says, you younger men likewise be subject to your elders, and all of you clothe yourselves with humility toward one another. For God is opposed to the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Therefore humble yourself under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you at the proper time, casting all your anxieties on him because he cares for you. When we have our focus on heaven, when we're working toward that end goal, when we're living according to Christ, certainly we have that, what's the word I'm looking for? That realization that we are strengthened to get to where we desire to be. And that's in that heavenly abode to receive that promise. So the brother of humble circumstance can bring himself up to that glory. In contrast, but just different, maybe we would want to say, probably just different. Verse 8 says, being a double-minded man, verse 10, excuse me. And the rich man is to glory in his humiliation, because like flowering grass he will pass away. While the brother of low circumstance, humble circumstance, raises himself up, the rich are commanded to humble themselves. Now, in our minds, the word humiliation is probably not, how would I say, in our current vernacular, humiliation means to be beaten down. But I think it would be better if the rich man is to glory in his humility. I think that would be a better word there, humility. In essence, these two different people, two stations of life, undergoing trials, difficulties, tribulations, to be humbled from their position. Now, if I was rich and I was having struggles, I would try to overcome those struggles a lot of times. Maybe not always, but a lot of times by myself, or I would use my wealth to overcome my troubles. But even those that are immensely wealthy needs to humble themselves before God. While the brother of humble circumstance finds glory in his hope that one day he will realize obtaining that high estate in heaven, the rich brother has the high estate here and needs to humble themselves to contemplate the path that leads to the heavenly abode. Though money can get a man out of many troubles in life, he cannot get him out of all the calamities that comes his way. As we note here in verse 2, consider it all joy, my brethren, when you encounter various trials. Here's one of the who undergoes calamity while wealth by the world's standards, and is commanded to glory in this, even that he brought his life to humbling himself. And a lot of times it's hard for people to humble themselves. Over in Luke chapter 12. Luke chapter 12. We'll drop down to about verse 15. Luke chapter 12, verse 15. It says, then he said to them, beware and be on your guard against every form of greed. For not even when one has abundance does his life consist of his possessions. The key factor is that all the things in this world can't get us out of all the difficulties. The thing is that God can help us through the struggles of life, no matter whether we are, as it notes here, a rich person or the poor. And he says here in verse 10, the latter part, because flowering grass, he will pass away. And he goes into this section beginning in verse 11, noting the brevity of life. And that's one of the things that James talks about in his writings, is just how short life is. And when we look at the span of eternity, eternity had its beginning at the creation, because our eternity began there. But there is no end. It is infinite. Eternity goes on forever. Now, when we come into this world, our life in this world begins. But when we make the transition from this life to the next, our life does not end. It is infinite. It continues onward. And that's hard for us to really grasp. But when we look in the concept of eternity, James says our life is just like a vapor. And we've all seen a vapor. You know, you go in there and you're cooking something on the stove and got a little water in it or moisture, and it comes up and it doesn't last very long. That's the way life is. It's here today and gone tomorrow. But we live forever. Just in a different place, a place of our choosing. So he says here, the brother of humble circumstance is to glory in his high position. The rich man is to glory in his humiliation, because like a flower, he will pass away. Doesn't matter whether we're rich or poor. We have to strengthen ourselves and remember that if we allow, God is with us always. And whatever we face in this life, God will strengthen us to deal with it. You know, we talked about the passage over in 1 Corinthians that God's not going to give us any more than we can handle. Even sometimes I think he gets on the precipice, you know, right up to the nitty-gritty. But he's not. We have to choose to be strengthened by what we deal with in life. Now, he continues here in verse 11. He says, for the sun rises with a scorched wind and withers the grass, and its flowers fall off, and the beauty of its appearance is destroyed. So too the rich man in the midst of his pursuits will fade away. And I really believe that we understand firsthand about the scorching wind that withers grass, because we get that quite regularly around here. The grass passes away. It's just like it is out there right now. You know, we got a little bit of rain here a few weeks back, and my pasture, there wasn't anything out there a few weeks ago. And I started cutting it this last week, Thursday, I cut it. And it's about, I don't know, it's probably 3 foot tall, the blue stem in my pasture. But since it's been, again, dry, that blue stem is dying. It's about dead. Cut's good, though. it's just right for cutting and baling. So we've been out there cutting it, and we've got a few bales put up. So we understand that. Now, what's James going for? Well, we live on earth. We have all these things. But when we make that transition, nothing remains. We don't take anything with us. Over in Job, we won't turn there, but Job 14:1-2 says, man who is born of woman is short-lived and full of turmoil. Like a flower, he comes forth and withers. He also flees like a shadow and does not remain. I always like those flowers that come up first in spring. You'll have to ask Linda what the name of them are because I never can remember it, but they're little yellow flowers that pop up on the south side of our place down there. They're the first ones up. And usually the first mowing, they're up and pretty and about this tall, and I mow around them. And then in a few weeks, they die. And then I mow over them. But they're so beautiful. And they're the first ones that come up in the spring. The flower comes up and it dies away. It's just like our gardens. Our gardens are struggling. It's like we was talking about this morning earlier about the cotton and how I don't know if it was sprayed or if it's just dry and the leaves are now falling off the cotton plants. The thing is that life is short and we have to make the best of what we have. The point is that everyone ought to contemplate eternity. Where do we want to live infinitely? Now, I understand that there are those who teach the idea of annihilation. That we're just like Rover, we're dead all over. You know, there's nothing after this. But I don't believe that to be true. Because the Bible does not teach that concept. Now, if they will go back and they will look at these passages that talk about being destroyed, not understanding what that word means, or the context in which it is used. But life is forever. Now, people have this concept that God's just going to save everybody and everybody's going to be okay. But the Bible doesn't teach that either. As a matter of fact, we've been talking about in our Wednesday night class over there in Matthew, chapter 7, about verse 13 and 14, that many will follow the wide road to destruction, eternal separation from God. So there is two choices: eternal separation from God, or to choose the narrow road, as it notes there in Matthew 7, to that road that leads to that mansion on a hilltop. That promise that Jesus gave us. The sad commentary is few will find it, or few will follow it.
Most people nowadays expect tomorrow.
Yeah.
You should live your life accordingly on this day because you don't know what tomorrow holds.
You don't know if you're going to be here tomorrow.
Yeah, and a lot of people expecting, hey, tomorrow we'll do this, do that.
Yeah.
But you don't know.
And that gets to the passage that James has in here about the brevity of life. I think it's about Yep, chapter 4, verse 14. Verse 13. James 4:13. Says, "Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a city and spend a year there and engage in business and make a profit. Yet you do not know what your life will be like tomorrow. You are just a vapor that appears for a little while and vanishes away. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. But as it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. Therefore, to one who knows the right thing to do and does not do it, to him it is sin." The brevity, the shortness of life is a reality. You know, I guess I got the understanding of how brief life can be working with EMS. Because people would get in an automobile and they would be traveling to wherever they were going, and they expected to get there. They didn't expect that their life would come to an end somewhere along the road. It's kind of like the morning that we were coming here. Praise the Lord that He kept us alive, you know, and all of that. But I wasn't expecting somebody to come along and T-bone us, dump us over upside down in a ditch. But I've seen things that was a whole lot worse than what we endured. And people lost life. There's no guarantees about tomorrow. There's no guarantees about after a while. And, you know, it gets back to this. He says, the one who knows the right thing to do and does not do it, to him it is sin. How many people put off following Jesus? Saying, well, you know, one of these days, I'm going to follow Jesus. One of these days, I'm going to have my sins forgiven in baptism. One of these days, and folks, too many people never get to one of these days. And it's too late. I've seen it way too much. Way too much. You know, again, working with EMS as a gospel preacher, hospice, all of those things, people wait till it's too late. When you make the transition from this life to the next, the choice is made. You've made the choice. And you can't blame anyone but yourself. That's why it is so imperative that we seek the truth and we follow the truth. You know, we sing that song that's got unprepared to meet thy God. Matthew 7. Those folks on the wide way, wide road, wide gate, they're unprepared to meet their God. And what even breaks my heart even worse is those who think they are prepared and have been lied to. And they're not ready. So life is short. But when we endure various trials, we will be strengthened if we allow God to help us. And that's what James is bringing to light in all of this. God will help us endure. And we will be strengthened. Doesn't matter what comes our way. We can overcome. So let's begin there in verse 12. Next Lord's Day morning, as it says here in verse 15 of James chapter 4, if the Lord wills. So we'll begin there next Lord's Day morning.